The most unbelievable coincidence in the Bible. One of the most amazing coincidences is found in the Book of Esther. It is one of the Bible's many astounding stories and happenings that are hard to comprehend or explain. The plot is set in ancient Persia, where Esther, a Jewish lady, succeeds to the throne of King Xerxes. King Xerxes was married to Vashti before Esther became queen. Vashti, however, defied the king's order to appear before him and flaunt her beauty to the guests one day during a royal feast. Xerxes was incensed by this defiance, and he commanded Vashti to relinquish her throne and leave the kingdom. After Vashti was expelled, Xerxes gave the order to find a new queen. As Xerxes ruled over a vast empire that included numerous diverse cultures and ethnicities, the search required extensive resources. In order to pick the ideal queen, Xerxes ordered that all eligible ladies be brought to the palace to compete in a beauty contest. One of the young women brought to the palace to contest the role of the queen was Esther. She was a Jew, raised by her cousin Mordecai after being orphaned as a child. But she kept her Jewishness a secret, as Mordecai had told her. Esther rapidly attracted the king's attention due to her beauty and kind nature. Esther remained kind and modest throughout the contest, even as she won the king's favor. The other young women who had competed for the post were thrilled when she was ultimately chosen as the new queen. Esther's ascent to the position of queen was astounding given her low beginnings and the difficulties against her. She was promoted to a position of tremendous power and influence. Nevertheless, because the king had fallen in love with her for her beauty, kindness, and elegance. This section of the story serves as crucial background information for the subsequent events, as Esther's status as queen would enable her to be crucial in saving her people from annihilation. Now, at the same time, a man named Haman had risen to power too. He was a prominent member of the Persian Empire and one of King Xerxes' trusted counsels. However, he had a strong animosity toward Jews, which would ultimately bring him to ruin. The reasons for Haman's hatred of the Jews are unknown. While some academics speculate that his hatred may have been fueled by racial or religious prejudice, others contend that it may have been motivated by political or economic concerns. Haman was resolved to see the Jewish people eliminated, regardless of the reason, and he started planning their extinction. The extent of Haman's scheme to exterminate the Jews was wicked. He persuaded King Xerxes to enact a decree authorizing the extermination of all Jews residing in the Persian Empire. The command was issued throughout the empire, setting a date for the mass execution of the Jewish population. Haman's determination to see the Jews killed was only one aspect of his hatred for them. He was also motivated by a need for fame and power. He constructed lofty gallows and intended to hang Mordecai, Esther's cousin, who had refused to bow down to him, on it to show off his strength and dominance. When the Jewish people learned about Haman's intention to wipe them out, they were devastated. They fasted and wept, and their leaders started looking for solutions to the problem. The edict and the threat it presented to their people deeply troubled Esther and Mordecai. In particular, Esther struggled to balance her obligations to her people and her allegiance to the king. She was first hesitant to tell the king that she was Jewish out of concern for both her safety and the protection of her people. Mordecai, on the other hand, urged Esther to act, informing her that she had been made queen for such a time as this. Esther 4:14. According to Mordecai, Esther had been put in her position for a reason, and she had a responsibility to use that source of authority to help her people. Finally, Esther followed Mordecai's instruction and decided to tell the king she was a Jew. The night before Esther was scheduled to make her case to the king, something extraordinary occurred. The king struggled to fall asleep due to an attack of sleeplessness. He asked his servants to read to him from the histories of his reign to pass the time. As he was listening, King Xerxes was struck by a memory of an event that had happened in the past. The royal records had mentioned the loyalty of a man by the name of Mordecai, who had discovered a conspiracy to kill him and reported it. The king was conscious that he had never given Mordecai the necessary appreciation for his assistance, so he inquired of his attendants what had been done to honor him. It turned out that nothing had been done in honor of Mordecai for his loyal act. As luck would have it, Haman had arrived at the palace just then to ask that Mordecai be executed by hanging on the gallows he had constructed. When the king asked how he would honor a man who had served him diligently, Haman thought the king was asking about himself, so he suggested a large procession through the streets of the city. He was shocked and appalled when the king told him to execute his plan for Mordecai rather than for himself. The incident involving insomnia was a fascinating turn in Esther's life, and in particular the saving of the Jews. Mordecai's devotion to the king had been overlooked, and he received neither recognition nor compensation when he did it. It came in instrumental in saving the Jewish population at this point. Meanwhile, Mordecai, after learning of Haman's scheme, had persuaded Esther to tell the king she was a Jew and beg for her people's survival. This was a risky step, though, as the king could execute anyone who approached him without a summons. Esther agreed with Mordecai's idea despite the risk. Before going before the king, she fasted and prayed for 3 days. The following day, Esther went before the king, putting her own life in danger in order to defend the lives of her people. She had not been invited to the king's court, so he was taken aback to see her. The king was actually pleased to see her. Esther used a deft and calculated technique. That evening, Esther would make her plea at a private banquet. She invited both the king and Haman. Esther told the king at the supper that she was a Jew and explained the seriousness of the situation. The king was moved by her pleas as she begged for her people's lives. The king sought to know who was behind the conspiracy against the Jews because he was astonished and furious about it. Esther pointed to Haman, who was seated next to them at the feast table. King Xerxes walked out of the chamber in rage. He was very angry with Haman's plot. Realizing that his fate was sealed, Haman, in the meantime, knelt before Esther and begged for forgiveness. Haman was still kneeling before Esther when the king entered the room again. The king mistakenly thought he was trying to assault her. The king gave the order for Haman to be put to death right away on the gallows he had constructed for Mordecai. The Jewish people were given the right to defend themselves against their assailants once Haman was overthrown. The Jews came together and fought their enemies on the 13th of Adar, the day on which they were originally supposed to be killed. Many of their adversaries were defeated, and they were able to successfully defend themselves. The 14th of Adar, the day after, was declared a day of joy and festivity. Jews all throughout the world continue to observe Purim, the name given for this holiday. Jews get together to read the Book of Esther, have joyous meals, donate charity to the needy, and exchange presents of food and wine. They also have holiday customs, such as donning costumes and taking part in carnivals and parades. Additionally, Jews are exhorted to increase their acts of generosity and kindness toward one another during Purim. It is a time to establish ties to the local community and friendships, while also demonstrating compassion and caring for those who are in need. The life of Esther serves as a strong illustration of how God can move inexplicably to bring forth good in the world. The events of the story could initially appear to be a collection of unrelated coincidences and fortunate breaks. However, a closer look reveals that there is a greater force operating behind the scenes. God is never expressly referenced in the story. Many of the happenings, though, appear to be the result of divine intervention. For instance, Mordecai was ultimately recognized by the monarch and elevated to a position of prominence as a result of his decision to uncover a plan to assassinate the king. Due to his acts of loyalty to the king, the Jewish people were saved. His devotion to the monarch had not gone unnoticed, and in the end, he received praise and distinction for his bravery and commitment. Esther was also granted the ability to save her people from destruction by a higher force. Her beauty and ability to charm the king were all in the grand plan of God to save the Jews. It serves as a reminder that even when things seem bleak and uncertain, we can have faith that God is actively at work to make things right in the world. In this sense, this story serves as an illustration of how God may operate in mysterious ways for our ultimate good, even though we are unable to perceive it right away. By listening to this message of hope, courage, and faith, we are reminded that we are never completely alone, and that we can put our faith in the ability of a higher force to lead us toward a better future. Mordecai uses the phrase, at a time like this to encourage Esther to use her position to help her people. He advises Esther to utilize her influence to save her people from being destroyed by saying that she was put in her position of power for such a time as this. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Exodus chapter 4 verses 14. Since then, the term "at a time like this" has become a strong reminder of the significance of stepping up in times of adversity. It conveys the idea that each of us has a part to play in the events of our life, and that we are frequently required to behave bravely and firmly when confronted with challenging situations.